What are we doing today, love?
We are on our second day of the historic battlefield trail where the Revolutionary War started, where Paul Revere left Boston, headed this way to warn them that the British were coming. And they literally came up this hill, past this house, into Concord, inspected some arms, didn't have much trouble, but by the time they came back, the Minutemen, which was the local militia, had rallied their forces, and they had a heck of a fight going all the way from here back to Boston with the tail between their legs when those Minutemen took care of business. So this morning, Dale and I are just outside of Lexington in Concord at the national park called Minuteman Historical Park. And this road that we're on here is the actual road where Paul Revere had left Boston and had ridden his horse out here to gather militia against the British. And he was actually arrested just right down on this road. Eventually arrested. So this is where the beginning of the Revolutionary War started.
On the morning of the 19th, just at dawn, alarm guns were fired in Reading, followed shortly by a post with the message, as they expressed it, that the regulars were headed for Concord.
Just off the road that Paul Revere and his two other compatriots rode down is the Whitmore house right behind me. And this is right off the road. And so they stopped here and told the two men that were living here, Whitmore's, the elder Whitmore, who was the dad, and then his son-in-law and his daughter who lived here. They instructed those two men to come out with the militia because it was their obligation as part of the militia. But the wife had just had a baby earlier that week, and it was not good, and she was very sickly. So those two men had to make a decision. Do we stay with our family, or do we go out with the militia and fight? Well, they chose to stay with their family. They evacuated this house as the war began. But this is the house. It's still standing. It was standing then, and it's standing today. It's one of 11 witness houses on this trail or in this park that were standing at the time of the Revolution. Captain William Smith House, one of the 11 witness houses here in the park, which means it was standing at the time that the battles were taking place down the road. This house has been in continuous use since 1690. Park Service, of course, owns it now, but there's some interesting architectural features to it. So above the windows there in the front, you can see the white strip, and that's rounded plaster. It's a curved plaster, which they call a cove. It's a rounded cove designed, as we're told, to keep birds from roosting up there. And then in the chimney, you can see the sculpted shape there. It's called a tablet chimney, which was done to represent or to be a symbolic of the Ten Commandments. This has to be one of the biggest fireplaces I've ever seen. This is one of the 11 witness sites here. So this is the original fireplace. The home burnt down in 1968. It was still being used as a restaurant at that point. But this is a pretty massive chimney that goes a level down into the ground below the ground level of the foundation. British were retreating back toward Lexington, they came by this site, which is home of the Fisk House. And here was a well, and the British were getting water out of the well. Some were going into the house right behind me. As the militia came down, one of the militiamen walked up to the house, or walked up to the well right here, and unexpectedly met a British soldier. They looked at each other. The British soldier said, "You're a dead man." The militiaman said, "So are you." They both raised their weapons and fired at the same time. The British soldier was killed. The militia lay mortally wounded. Back in another cemetery. This is the Sleepy Hollow Cemetery in Concord, Massachusetts. The reason this one is significant is because there are 4 very famous authors buried in this cemetery: Henry David Thoreau, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Louisa May Alcott, and Ralph Waldo Emerson. So we're back on the Battle Road near Lexington and Concord. This is the next day, and we're doing kind of the other half of the trail today because we just ran out of time yesterday. But the spot I'm standing on, about 1:30 a.m. in the morning, well, that's what a.m. means. So 1:30 a.m. on April 19th, as Paul Revere and 2 other folks rode with him, headed from Lexington to Concord to continue spreading the alarm. At this spot, they were stopped because a mounted British officer patrol came out of the woods onto the battle road at this spot, and they stopped the 3 riders right here. And as they approached them, one of them turned this way, went cross country and joined the road back further west of us. One of them turned completely around and made his escape. Revere tried to turn right into this wood line where you see Kim standing. Tried to turn right into this wood line, and more officers came out of the wood, grabbed his horse's bridle and stopped him on the spot, and he was captured. They took him to Lexington. They held him for a couple of hours, interrogated him, and finally released him without his horse. He took his horse. They released him. He went back to Lexington, to the part of Lexington, just as the British were firing on the colonials in the Lexington Common, which is the shot heard around the world. The house behind me is the Merriam House, built about 1750, and it was on this green here in front as the British the troops were coming back from Concord toward Boston down the road, that some patriots who had come in from Concord from the North Bridge came through another area, through some open meadows, came up to this house, were watching the British troops through the windows and around the buildings that used to stand here along with that house itself. And it was right out here that the first shots of the general battle all the way back to Boston began. So the British threw some flankers out, encountered the Patriots here in this area. Shots were fired to no effect at first, but as the Patriots got closer and closer, they began taking their toll on the British column. And so that's when they threw the flankers out. But these are where the first shots of the running battle, of where the revolution began, was right on this spot. Okay, something I forgot to mention is that when the British came through this area, they sent some soldiers into this house, and the soldiers, according to witnesses that day, took baked and unbaked pies directly out of the oven because they were famished, quite frankly. So this is the last day of the season. The Merriam House is open, and as a gift to everyone who comes in, you to take a pie. One of the neat things about our trip, being able to spend more than just a week or two where we're staying, is that you can find little out-of-the-way places like this path. It doesn't look like much, but this path is at the top of a hill, at the bottom of which is a house that Nathaniel Hawthorne used to own and live in. And this was a path he would take during the day often, and just walk to and fro on this ridge, and to think and to contemplate and to write and to work through problems with his story. So this is kind of a thing that's hidden in the woods, and you wouldn't even see the plaque if you weren't looking for it to know what this is. But it's right on top of the hill above the house he used to own, which actually was owned prior to him owning it, was owned by Louisa May Alcott's family, and she spent part of her childhood there. And largely her childhood, or the years she spent in that house, was the basis for her book, The Little Women, which she wrote at a different location. But she used to live here as well. And the same house, prior to all of that, during the Battle of Concord, or afterwards, when the British soldiers were coming back down this road toward Boston, this was a house specifically mentioned by British General Gage that the troops needed to search to find ammunition or military stores or whatever. They passed right by it and never went in, even though there was ammunition stored there. So kind of a stroke of good fortune for the colonials, the British didn't even go inside. This is the James Barrett house. This was the final stop on the British soldiers' march. They had been told by a Tory spy that there was ammunition and other military supplies stored at this house. And in fact, there were, but they'd been moved off before they arrived here. So by the time the British soldiers got here, there was nothing for them to find. And when they showed up, James Barrett's wife was the only one home, so she invited them in and told them to search, but they'd find nothing. And while they were inside, they asked her for some food. She fed them some food. They offered to pay. She said she wouldn't take their money, so they threw some shillings into her lap while she sat there, and she looked at them and said, "That is the price of blood." So after all the back and forth during the day, finally the British are in Concord. They've spread out. They're searching homes for ammunition and military supplies. They have a detachment of about 100 soldiers guarding this bridge. They want to make sure no one gets across the bridge into Concord to disrupt their search. And just in front of me, behind where you're looking, is a rise just beyond a couple of homes that were situated out here, where about 400 militia and Minutemen had gathered. They were watching the British here on the bridge, and then after a while, they saw some smoke rising up from the town of Concord, which was not the British burning the town. It was an accidental fire that had started. So the militia and the Minutemen moved down to the bridge, and this was really the flashpoint. For whatever reason, the British fired on them. The militia and the Minutemen fired back, and those actually were the first shot to the Revolutionary War. There have been some skirmishes before, but this is the time now when the war had started. Right on Lexington Green here in Lexington, and it was up this road, Massachusetts Avenue now it's called. The British were headed toward Concord out of Boston, and as they were coming through, the militia here in Lexington had already been notified that the British were on their way. They had their militia turn out here in the green. They were standing in formation waiting for the British, and they had been told by their captain, John Parker, to not fire unless fired upon, but if they mean to have a war, then let it begin here. As the British came through, their officer told the militia to just throw down their arms and disperse. Captain Parker told his men to disperse, but as they began leaving, shots fired out from the British, and that was the shot heard around the world here on Lexington Green. These were the first shots of the Revolutionary War. They would then march through here on their way to Concord, and then that's when all of the heavy skirmishes began and the real fighting started. One of the cool things about the green is they've got a lot of spots marked, like where the militia were standing, and then in the monument they have here on the green that you can see over my shoulder here, 7 of the 8 militia who were killed during the battle are buried right near that monument. But another cool thing about the green is it's the first place on our trip that we've actually begun to see some color change.